The head of the European Union, Donald Tusk, recently took a swipe at President Trump, bemoaning what he called the capricious assertiveness of the Trump administration and adding, with friends like that, who needs enemies? The president could probably say the same thing about the EU as they shamelessly chase corporate contracts in Iran instead of standing with America against the terror regime. In my 2016 book, More Human, I described the European Union as a vast, stinking cesspit of corporate corruption gutted up in the garb of idealistic internationalism. In 1999, the entire executive leadership of the EU, a total of 20 officials, resigned over cronyism and corruption, and it's only gotten worse since then. The European Union is tonight's Swamp Watch. In 2014, the EU published a report highlighting what they called a breathtaking level of corruption throughout its member states, estimating that corruption cost the EU economy more than 120 billion euros every year. The report found that around 15% of respondents in Poland, Slovakia and Hungary said they'd been asked for a bribe or had been expected to pay one in the past 12 months. But listen to this. The EU originally planned to include its own institutions in the corruption report, until they got the findings, at which point they just deleted the chapter on their own corruption. Officials said it would be difficult to provide an objective self-evaluation because there were no independent external reviews. Well, how about commissioning one? They can't wait to investigate everyone else. They could certainly afford it. A study by Britain's pro-Brexit campaign found a shocking list of expenses by European officials. In a single year, they spent €250,000 on catering, 214,000 on luxury hotels, 23,000 on chauffeurs, and over 1,000 on chocolate. And they're trying to cover up their swampy spending with shady accounting. EU officials spent €54,000 at the five-star Stamford Hotel, Brisbane, and labelled it Commission Policy and Legal Advice. When they spent over €3,000 at the Chateau de Limelette, they described it as agriculture and rural development. And when EU science officials spent €22,000 at the five-star Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore, they called it direct research. Direct fraud, more like. Whistleblower Marta Andreessen, former chief accountant at the EU, found a £130 million discrepancy between two sets of books for 2001. She tried to raise the alarm about what she called Enron-style bookkeeping. Guess what? She was fired. That's just one of many corruption scandals that have plagued the EU in recent years. In 2012, EU Health Commissioner John Dalli resigned amid influence peddling accusations over the solicitation of a nearly $80 million kickback from the tobacco industry while overseeing an overhaul of European tobacco legislation. Guess where former European Commission President Jose Manuel Barroso ended up after his job running the EU bureaucracy? Goldman Sachs, of course. Investigators are now looking into a meeting Barroso had with European Commission Vice President Jyrki Katainen in late 2017 to discuss trade and defence issues, a meeting that both parties said was personal and of a private nature. Yeah, right. And here's another example. In March 2011, two European Parliament lawmakers resigned and a third stepped down from his position after a British newspaper reported they'd agreed to propose legislation in return for bribes. Of course, it wouldn't be a proper swamp without a vast lobbying industry. The EU actually published a report on the influence of lobbyists, but it was so damning that they tried to delete it from the internet. According to that report, in 2015, there were over 8,000 registered lobbyists associated with the European Union. But wait for it, the so-called Lobbying Transparency Register is actually voluntary. They only register if they feel like it. So the EU report admitted that its estimate of 8,000 lobbyists likely underestimates the actual total. You think? The Corporate Europe Observatory reports that there are between 15 and 30,000 lobbyists. A 2015 report by Politico found EU officials recorded over 4,000 meetings with lobbyists in just 6 months, including lobbyists for companies like Google, General Electric and Airbus, to name a few. The LobbyFacts website reports that the top 10 companies engaged in EU lobbying spent a combined total of €39 million every year. And that's just what's reported on a voluntary basis. The revolving door is spinning around nicely in Brussels too. An organisation called Alter EU found that 50%, half of all the staff working at the biggest EU lobbying firms, previously worked in one of the EU's institutions. And from 2009 to 2010, 6 out of 13 departing EU commissioners moved from public office into corporate or lobbying jobs. No wonder the EU tried to delete all this after it was published. I guess that's what they really mean by their right-to-be-forgotten data laws. Of course, the European Union has a hard time reconciling the competing interests of its member states. So guess what the clueless elitists running the EU came up with to promote cooperation and a sense of common identity? The Estimate Europa 2, a 30-metre-long, 44-metre-high yacht. What a perfect symbol of this unaccountable, corrupt, globalist swamp. No wonder Britain voted to leave. Let's hope more countries follow. That's the next revolution we need.